So, as you probably know, since about 2018, the Turkish Lira has been collapsing. We've done videos on this before, so if you want a more detailed explainer, you can go and watch them. But the TLDR of those videos is that Erdogan has some pretty funky ideas about monetary policy. The question now, though, is whether President Erdogan can turn things around. So let's take a look at his plans and discuss whether he's doing enough to save Turkey's failing currency. A quick thank you to everyone who's watched this channel in 2021. We only launched in January, but we've already picked up 234,000 subscribers, making us the third biggest TLDR channel. So if you're not subscribed, then hit the button to get more from us in 2022 and beyond. In 2018, thanks to a combination of factors, including Trump's steel and aluminium tariffs, censorship of financial data, and Erdogan's interference with the central bank, the lira fell in value. And as it did, Turkey began struggling to pay off its foreign debts, and imports became more expensive, forcing inflation up to 20%. Now, when your currency is devaluing and inflation is spiraling out of control, most economics teachers will tell you to do one thing: raise interest rates. If you raise interest rates, you make borrowing money more expensive, and you encourage saving. This means that two things happen. Businesses and consumers spend less money, which reduces demand for assets and eventually brings down inflation, and two, demand for your currency increases, because it pays out a better interest rate, bringing up the value of your currency. Now, there are some obvious downsides. By limiting access to cheap credit, raised interest rates can slow economic growth. But given that Turkey's two main problems, depreciating currency and rampant inflation, could both be solved by raising interest rates, it would seem like the right thing to do. Unfortunately for Turks though, Erdogan doesn't seem to agree with traditional economic policy. For reasons unknown, Erdogan believes that raising interest rates actually increases inflation, and every time his central banker increases interest rates, Erdogan sacks him, which is why Turkey is on its fourth central banker in 3 years. The current one, an Erdogan loyalist, has heeded the president's advice and actually cut rates from 19 to 14%, with the latest cut coming as recently as December 14th. Somewhat unsurprisingly, these cuts have forced the lira even lower. On December 19th, after Erdogan defended the latest cut by claiming that it was his duty as a Muslim to keep lowering interest rates, the lira plunged 25% to a new low of just 6 cents. Because, well, foreign investors aren't particularly keen on scripturally defined monetary policy. For context, this now means that you'd need 17 lira to buy a dollar. A year ago, it was about 8 lira to the dollar. And back in 2008, the lira and dollar were nearly 1-to-1. At this point, things were looking really bad for Turkey's economy. In spite of all of the advice, Erdogan looked to be continuing with his unorthodox monetary policy, even if that meant collapsing the lira and rampant inflation. According to official figures, year-on-year inflation was up to 21% in November, but independent estimates put it nearer 50%. Foreign investment was also drying up, and Turkish companies were being forced to default on their foreign currency loans. As such, Turks began converting their liras into dollars at record pace. But because banks had already used most of their foreign currency deposits, they didn't have many dollars spare. Some Turks, wary that the banks might run out of dollars, started withdrawing their dollar-denominated savings altogether. This is clearly bad news because it increases the risk of a bank run. Essentially, a bank run is when a bank's customers, worried about its solvency, its ability to pay out withdrawals, withdraw all of their deposits. As more customers withdraw their deposits, the chances of default, i.e. insolvency, increases, which prompts more people to withdraw their deposits, which makes insolvency more likely, etc., etc., eventually resulting in a bank's default and financial chaos. Presumably worried about this, on Monday, December 20th, just a day after he invoked his Muslim faith to justify his rate cuts, Erdogan suddenly changed course. He announced that the government would guarantee bank deposits in lira, protecting them from swings in exchange rate against the dollar. Under his new plan, the Turkish government would compensate holders of lira deposits whenever their currency's depreciation is higher than the interest rate offered by their banks. For example, let's say I had 170 lira in the bank with an interest of 14% per year. In dollars, assuming an exchange rate of 17 lira per dollar, this means I have about $10. But remember, my bank is giving me an interest rate of about 14% a year. So, by the end of the year, I should have about 194 lira. Let's say that in the same time period, the value of the lira against the dollar also drops by 14%. If that happened, then the interest rate and currency devaluation would cancel each other out, and I'd still have about $10 worth of lira. And therefore, the Turkish government wouldn't have to top me up. If, however, the lira depreciated by more than the interest rate, say 20%, then $1 would be worth 21.25 lira, which means that $10 would now be worth 212.5 lira. The bonus lira I got as interest from my bank wouldn't cover this difference, and therefore the Turkish government would have to top up my balance from 194 lira to 212.5 by giving me 18.5 lira. Now, this policy has two effects. Firstly, it prevented a run on the banks, because bank customers would know that the deposits won't drop in value. Secondly, it should make the lira more attractive to foreign investors again, because essentially it's an indirect interest rate hike indexed against the dollar. Not only do you get the 14% interest rate advertised, you also get a bit extra if the lira falls against the dollar. Immediately after the announcement, the lira shot up in value, jumping 40% from 17 lira per dollar to about 12. So does that mean that Erdogan has saved Turkey's economy? Well, no, not at all. The jump in lira was probably more a reaction to Erdogan's eventual admission that the economy was in crisis at all than it was an endorsement of this actual policy. While his new policy has prevented a bank run, in practice, all it's really done is shift the economic pain onto the Turkish taxpayer. If the lira depreciates in value, the Turkish treasury will have to top up millions of lira. There are two ways of doing this. Option 1 is using taxpayer money, which presumably means higher taxes. This isn't a great option for Erdogan, whose popularity is already falling. His net approval is down to negative 15.2%, the lowest it's been since June of 2015, when Erdogan's ruling AKP party lost their majority in parliament. And notably, today the AKP coalition are polling behind their opposition yet again. So, were elections held today, polling suggests that Erdogan would lose his majority. Option 2, though, is for the Treasury to borrow the money, which would probably require quantitative easing from the central bank. This would risk worsening inflation, which was already expected to increase after the 50% increase in minimum wage, announced earlier this month, goes into effect. All in all, neither option looks good for Erdogan, who's finally paying the price for economic incompetence that began years ago. He's left with a bunch of bad options, and even this win today is more a sticking plaster, with 2 more bad options attached. And as we mentioned in our earlier video, this might not be great news for Turkey's democracy, because authoritarians like Erdogan don't tend to react nicely to being backed into a corner. Anyway, what do you think? Will Erdogan's new plan work? And if not, will he eventually give up and raise taxes? Or has he gone too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and all of the other TLDR channels to get updates on stories like this as we head into 2022. A special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.